Good evening. I'm Scott Dodson, Executive Director of the Library of Virginia Foundation. I want to welcome you to our first virtual event celebrating the 2020 Library of Virginia Annual Literary Awards celebration. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to recognize the generosity of the donors who make the library's work possible. Most notably this evening, Dominion Energy, as the lead sponsor of the 2020 Literary Awards. The Library of Virginia Foundation's work is to find the vital resources that help the library collect, preserve, and share the stories of Virginia. We couldn't do it without you. Tonight I ask you to consider supporting the library by contributing towards our $15,000 challenge by calling 804-692-3599 or visiting the link on your screen in the comments. On behalf of all of us at the Library of Virginia, I thank you in advance for your support. And now, I'd like to welcome tonight's moderator, writer, editor, and freelance book reviewer for the Washington Post and Los Angeles Times, Bethanne Patrick, to start what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation with our fiction finalists, Angie Kim, Tara Laskowski, and Christopher Tilghman. With that, I hand it over to you, Bethanne.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm delighted to be here this evening to support the Library of Virginia. And if I don't look exactly like the picture you saw on the screen a few minutes ago, 2020 has been a hard year. So anyway, I am delighted to be able to introduce our three fiction finalists for the Library of Virginia 2020 Awards. And all three of them are my fellow Virginians. I'm so excited. And I'm going to tell you about their bios and then introduce each of them with the title of their latest and nominated book. And then we'll get started with their talk. Thanks so much for being here and settle in for what is sure to be a great conversation among writers and readers. So first we have Angie Kim, who is the author of the national bestseller and Edgar finalist, Miracle Creek. That was named a best book of the year by a lot of places, Time, the Washington Post, Kirkus, and the Today Show, among just small, places like that. She's one of Variety magazine's 10 storytellers to watch and has written for Vogue, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. She moved from Seoul, Korea to Baltimore as a preteen and attended Stanford University and Harvard Law School, where she was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. A former trial lawyer, Angie now lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and three sons. Tara Laskowski is the author of One Night Gone, which won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel and was a finalist for the Mary Higgins Clark, Anthony, and Lefty Awards. She is also the author of two short story collections, Modern Manners for Your Inner Demons and Bystanders. She's published stories in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine and Mid-American Review, among others, and is the former editor of Smoke Long Quarterly. Tara earned a BA in English from Susquehanna University and an MFA from George Mason University, and she currently lives in Virginia with her husband and son. Last but not least, Christopher Tilghman is the author of two short story collections, In a Father's Place and The Way People Run, and three previous novels, The Right-Hand Shore, Mason's Retreat, and Roads of the Heart. He is a professor of English at the University of Virginia and lives with his wife, the novelist Caroline Preston, in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in Centerville, Maryland. Welcome, all three of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Bethanne, thank you.
So I'm going to ask each of you to tell us a little bit about your book, and I'm just going to go in the order in which I introduced you. So Angie Kim, Miracle Creek is your book out from Picador in paperback right now. And tell us a little bit about Miracle Creek, its plot, and what you consider it to be for you.
Sure. Yeah, so Miracle Creek is my debut novel. It's a genre has been one of those things that we sort of debate in-house, but we have settled on, I think, a literary courtroom drama about a Korean immigrant family and a young single mother who's on trial for murdering her 8-year-old son who's on the autism spectrum. And it takes place in the fictional town of Miracle Creek, which is a rural Virginia town where the Yu family, a Korean family, resides. And they have a new business called Miracle Submarine. And it is not a real submarine. It is a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber where patients go in and are infused with pure oxygen for everything ranging from cerebral palsy and autism to infertility and Lyme disease. And so at the beginning of the novel, someone, we think deliberately, sets fire to the oxygen tanks that are outside this chamber when there are actually patients sealed inside. It causes an explosion and an uncontrollable fire. And and some people die. And we immediately fast forward a year to a 4-day murder trial. And so in one sense, it is a whodunit, a why done it, a how done it, a mystery into sort of who set the fire and why and how. But I hope that it's also a window into the lives of these people, the immigrant family that owns this business, as well as the lives of the special needs parents who bring their kids here hoping for improvement and treatment for their children. And it's sort of about the desperation to connect with other people when you are feeling so isolated and so different from other people.
Excellent. Thank you. If I hadn't already read it twice, I would want to read it again now. So who knows, maybe a third time.
Yay, thank you.
You're welcome. Tara Laskowski, you're up next. One Night Gone is your debut novel. It's from Graydon House. And this one is a thriller. And again, we're going to talk about genre, but I'm not interested in keeping anyone within genre lines. So how do you describe One Night Gone?
Yeah. I describe it more as a suspense novel, which I know like there's all these different genres within the mystery and crime world. So for me, I think it's more of a suspense because I feel like when you talk about thriller, you're expecting a little bit more violence and action, maybe. Whereas this is more like a creepy, atmospheric kind of book. So, and actually at its heart, it's a cold case mystery, I would say. So my main character, Allison, is 40 years old and she has just lost her job. She's a meteorologist on a local TV network. And she just lost her job. She lost her husband, basically lost her purpose in life. And so she's trying to regroup and she gets this amazing offer to house sit in a wealthy beach town for a couple for a few months during the off season. So like right around now. So like kind of creepy fall at the beach for a few months by herself. And she's like, this is a great time for me to figure things out. Like, what am I going to do next? And so she goes there and she starts to sort of become friends with some of the locals in the town. And she starts to hear about this teenage girl that went missing in the town about 30 years before. And it really bothers her that it seems like none of the locals really care about what happened to this girl. And she sort of relates to that since she's just had her life fall apart. And so she starts to investigate this. And of course, because it's a mystery novel and a suspense novel, things don't go as well as you'd expect. And some of the locals don't want the secrets that they have buried uncovered. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara, so much. And before I talk to Chris Tilghman in just a second, I want to let all of our viewers and attendees know that you can put questions on the Facebook and YouTube pages, and we will be picking them up. And we have got plenty of time for you to speak with the authors or have your questions asked by me. I guess that's what I should say afterwards. So please go right ahead and send those questions in at any time. So last but certainly not least, Christopher Tilghman's Thomas and Beal in the Midi is also from Picador. And I just have to say, what a cover. All the covers are great, but this is just, for me, a very beautiful and evocative one, because I guess, Christopher Tilghman, you had to go to the south of France for research.
Yes, it was a struggle. And I had to do it at some length with my wife, Caroline, and it was wonderful to be in this region called Languedoc. But anyway, I'm really pleased to be here. and to share the stage with Tara and Angie. And I really congratulate our dear Library of Virginia for soldiering through the COVID and going forward with this wonderful event. It's been it's a high point for writers in Virginia every single year. And so I'm glad it's going forward now, even virtually. My novel is about a young interracial couple who escaped from Maryland to France in the 1890s in order to live as man and wife. In an earlier novel, The Right-Hand Shore, I told the story of them growing up on a farm on the eastern shore of Maryland and got them as far as a clandestine marriage in Virginia and getting them shunted onto a ship for France. This book picks up with the story with a nun meeting them in Le Havre and taking them to Paris to start their new lives. Much of the material and the events of the 3 books I've written about this farm, and the 4th one I'm working on now, is based on my own family's history and the property on the Eastern Shore. And the story of the son of the white landowner falling in love with the daughter of the black farm worker is no different. I was raised with this story. It's a tale of my family's past. Only in our case, the young couple could see no way forward, and he killed himself. He shot himself in a bedroom in a house one of my brothers now lives in. This was in 1896, and the man was almost 40. I've made him younger in this novel. But of the woman, it might not surprise anyone to know this family knows nothing. So I see this novel as a chance to give them the life that they never got to live. They go to France. They spend a winter in Paris under the watchful eyes of the Catholic Church, a sort of a subplot there where Thomas tries to figure out what he's going to do with his life. He's been kind of a feckless guy all through The Right-Hand Shore. So he's trying to figure out how they'll live. They have enough money to get there, but they're not sort of Jamesian rich expatriates. In the meantime, Beal, the woman, is amazed to find herself suddenly the sort of toast of Paris. She's pursued by painters who all want to paint her portrait. That this, in fact, is a historical fact. Has been much researched about the black model in the second half of the century in France. And in the second half of the novel, they move to the Midi, and think deep south as a term, the comparable term in American terms, the Midi of France, where Thomas has bought a neglected vineyard, and they attempt to find their lives in this region that has been devastated by a devastating great blight. For Thomas, this is, in the end, at last, after these pages on him, a purpose and a meaning for his life. But for Beal, who has been amazed to discover as a 20-year-old black girl raised in a shack in the Eastern Shore that she has thrived in Paris, she's now back on the farm, which was the one place on earth she vowed she would never return to. So that's the story. Race drives the situation, but it's really a story about a marriage, a young marriage, maybe a very ordinary marriage in unusual circumstances.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's definitely a story about love, but in different ways. All 3 of your novels, of course, are about love. Now, I'm going to start with that word I mentioned a few minutes ago, genre, but I think we can all agree that when it comes to excellent fiction, genre is no longer a dirty word. Each of you works within the conventions, but those conventions don't define your work. So let's talk about that. For example, let's start with you, Tara, in working on a novel of suspense. It's something that often has many kinds of rules. And you mentioned when you were describing your book that often there are expectations from readers and fellow writers and publishers about what a thriller is, what a suspense novel is, et cetera. And Angie, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. So what was it like for you to know you wanted to work in that genre, but not necessarily hew to all of its perfect rules?
Yeah. I actually like I always enjoy books where, either the genres are mixed or they play with it in a unique way. I'm not sure that I was brave enough to do that with a debut. So I guess I'd start with saying that my background is really more in what I would say literary fiction. So I have published 2 short story collections. I got my MFA at George Mason. So I've always kind of been trained in this literary sort of form, and always been really interested in character. And so I think even though now I would consider myself a crime or mystery writer, character is always super important to me, and it's kind of what comes first. I'm always thinking about the people first rather than what the plot is, which drives my editor and my agent crazy, but that's the way it is. And actually what's weird is when I'm writing my books, I'm very focused on plot because I think it's my weakest thing. And so I try to figure out the plot first, but the characters always kind of keep getting in the way. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I guess
I like that. That'll throw that up to Angie because, again, Miracle Creek is something that could be described in any number of ways. And that's a really good thing. But I'm also interested in what Tara was just talking about. Do you focus first on plot or characters, or is that an unanswerable question?
Yeah, to me, it's really, you can't really distinguish the two. I guess for me with Miracle Creek, because I'm relatively new to writing. So I started writing about 10 years ago, and I started with literary fiction with short stories. So, and a lot of my fiction is, magic realism and things like that. So it was not in the mystery suspense world. And so tackling a novel, I guess I did think a lot more about the structure and plot. Having said that, because it was my first novel, I actually have this file that I recently discovered on my laptop where I had in all caps, "This is not a novel," talking about Miracle Creek, where I was trying to tell myself, it's okay. I don't need to procrastinate. I don't need to be scared because this is not a novel. This is my first attempt. I'd heard so many stories from people about how, your first novel, you write it for practice and you put it away in a drawer and then you really get to the work. So, I have 7 POV characters in this novel, and I'm not sure that I would have done that if I really thought that this was going to be something that, was going to be published. And so having said, so that's a long way of saying I did not know the plot. I did not know who set the fire. I didn't know who set the fire until about a year into, maybe a year and a half into writing my first draft. And I think I was okay with that because I thought, again, this is just practice. This is fun. This is not a real novel. And I think that I was just reading, it's funny that you asked the question about the genre question. I was just reading this really great interview between Neil Gaiman and Kazuo Ishiguro about genre when, Ishiguro's Buried Giant came out and people were like, is this fantasy? Is he becoming a fantasy writer? They had this really fascinating talk about genre and how, and Neil Gaiman, I think, likes to talk about this hardcore pornography example, but he's sort of like, for him, the genre is the sex there? Is the story there to support sex, or is the sex there to support this story? And I think that's sort of an interesting way of thinking about it. What are the conventions and what are the reader expectations if you market something as one or the other? So, the marketing folks at FSG for Miracle Creek were sort of like, the problem with saying this is like a courtroom thriller is that there's a certain expectation for pacing and things, which might not really be met because there's a lot of, divergent strands in my novel. And so that's why we were like, let's put in that sort of word literary just as an expectation setter that, hey, this is going to take some meandering, and it's not going to be sort of like 1, 2, 3, this is what happens, and then that, and then that, and then that.
It's kind of like, I'm thinking about what you just said about Gaiman, and, it would be like if you wanted to go see something that was about fannies, but you wound up watching Fanny and Alexander instead. Just completely, blowing up expectations. I'm sorry. This is, it's just fascinating to me. And this actually is a good segue, Chris, to talk about Thomas and Beal, because you could call this historical fiction, and that has its certain expectations too, but it's not. I mean, yes, it has some history in it, some family history, but it also has a love story. It also has complete made up non-history things. When you are writing these books, which are connected, your novels, the connected novels about Mason's Retreat, how do you think about expectations? Do you just leave them behind completely, or do you have some things that you want to hit, some marks that you want to make?
Yeah, I think maybe one way to start answering that for me is just to refer to what Tara and Angie were saying about character. I don't start with character at all. I start with place and with history. I try and imagine the humans in that place and in that situation, in particular, this interracial love story, which is a family story, but certainly not mine. I'm just trying to understand better what it's like. And I think that this matter of genre really is intriguing. I mean, genre is king now. Neil Gaiman and Ishiguro talking about it. I mean, that was only just yesterday, right? I mean, and all of or many of our graduate students are just absolutely set free by the idea they can bend this like crazy. And they do it. In some ways, I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy, and I have to pull what hair is left out of my head. But it's true. And the thing is, there has been this sort of dual rap on genre. First of all, it's just used to dismiss whatever wasn't considered, high cultural by the dominant, forces. And secondly, that there is this sort of prescription of expectation. And, of the first, as I say, that's just nuts. That's long gone. And besides, domestic realism, which had been seen as in theory, high literature, is just now regarded as another genre, and not necessarily the most exciting one anyway. But I think it's really more important, as one critic has said, that genre is an instrument of meaning. It's a way of getting to truths that you couldn't get to otherwise. I think that's what excites our graduate students. Just to say, now I can just go into the fantastic here and rip this apart. So it becomes sort of deeply personal, I think. I mean, artistically personal. If one makes a choice in these things, I'm not sure one does. I think one just writes what one can write, what one can pull off. But still, the kind of the what ifs of it is so liberating. So it's very exciting, it seems to me.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to jump to a question because of how beautifully you've all answered that one about choosing to tell a story, because here we are in this awards week and there are different, modes being covered, poetry and nonfiction as well as fiction. So what does fiction allow you to do that nonfiction doesn't? And maybe writing fiction isn't any more of a choice than what genre you write in is a choice. Anyone?
I'll take a stab.
Oh, please.
I don't write. I've never written a word of nonfiction. I've done some kind of scholarly stuff, but I've never written a word of nonfiction. I absolutely wouldn't know how to begin. I mean, obviously, there's another area between fiction and nonfiction, which is autofiction, or the the non-fictional novel or whatever. We won't get into that.
Right.
The thing I think about fiction, there's a wonderful critic, Dorrit Cohen, her name is. Who said that fiction is a work of fiction is complete and unverifiable. So what that means to the writer is when it's done, and no one can call you on it, right? She says nonfiction is incomplete and verifiable, which is to say, in a biography, you're never done. There are always papers to find, and there are thousands of young scholars out there ready to rip you apart. So of the two paths, I'm very happy on the fiction side of that equation.
I do have to say though, like reader reviews, they will definitely rip you apart for things that you did not get right, even if it is fiction.
Even if it's something maybe you wanted it to be the way it was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And go ahead, Angie.
No, I was just gonna I was gonna pick up on that, Tara, and just say, I think that's been the freeing, the liberating thing about writing fiction, is that it does allow you the opportunity to sort of play the what ifs. I actually started by writing nonfiction as far as short pieces, as far as personal essays based on my experience as an immigrant, and also upon my experience as a mother of children who had some medical issues. And so writing for me was almost therapeutic, and that's how I actually came to be a writer, because before that, the only writing I had done was as a lawyer, as a business person, that, academic type stuff. And I had never really, I loved novels and I loved reading, but I didn't really think of myself in any way as ever wanting to write. Which I know makes me sort of strange in this world, but in our world. But in any case, I do think that I remember one time my husband sort of said about an essay, a particularly painful essay that I had written, that I showed him. And he sort of said, the problem with this is that these are not just your stories. They're the family stories. They're our kids' stories, and they're yours too, obviously, but they're also his and the kids, and there are issues of medical privacy. There are issues of, future insurability even, he's a lawyer too, you can tell. So all of those things. And he said, why not try fiction? And I remember when he said that, I was like, fiction? What do you mean, write fiction? I don't know how to write fiction. And he was like, well, you took classes on writing the personal essay. I'm sure there are classes at the Writer Center that you can take about, writing short stories. And so I started with short stories, and it was just so liberating for me. And it was so freeing, because these characters, I could sort of, there were certain truths that I had gone through myself, or that I could recognize other people had gone through, that I could sort of write in a very freeing way without worrying about, am I being, factual here? Am I being fair? Am I being, am I exposing myself or other people in my life that I care about as being awful people because I'm talking about sort of shameful things that they've done or thought, and I think those liberating things is what just drew me immediately to fiction. And I think it is, and I think that's one of the things that made me feel like, for example, Miracle Creek, it's a fictional town. And by making it a fictional town and, having the courtroom setting that it's in be a fictional county, I could get away with a lot of things and not worry about, are they going to call me on the fact that this courtroom procedure is ridiculous, and no sane judge would, have this happen. That's right,
because 3 of us here live in Fairfax County.
Right,
so.
right.
But the tension in each of these books, and I'm bringing that up now because Angie, you're talking about this familial tension, which is very real and, very important. But the actual novels each have tensions in them as well. And the ones that I pull out are not the only ones by any means. And feel free to talk about others. But I just wanted to speak about that for a moment, because I know from someone who has not yet published very much fiction, I'm talking about myself, that as a critic, it is sometimes very easy for me to say, oh, I loved what you did with X and Y. And the author will say, well, gosh, I'm glad you saw that because I wasn't thinking about it at all. And so there's racial equality in your book, Chris. There's socioeconomic disparity in Opal Beach for you, Tara. And Angie, among many other tensions in Miracle Creek, there is a conflict between parents as to, what can and should be told, when. And so you can either speak to what I just brought up, or you can speak to the idea of writing about tensions, especially things that are relevant for you personally or in the world today, or you could bring up something else from one of your books. So Tara, let's start with you. How about Opal Beach has, a lot of summer people with lots of money, but also a lot of people who live there year round who are either small business owners or really struggling.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely that class divide there, like the haves and the have-nots. And the way that they experience that beach town is very different. And they have very different perspectives on it. And so for me, that was a way of kind of getting at the theme that I see in the book of who gets to tell their story and whose stories get erased. And so one of the big things about, when Allison gets very interested in this missing girl, it bothers her that her story is not being told, that she's basically being erased. And the idea of who you are and what your power is and how that affects, what you can do and how you can move up and down these, class sort of ladders and things. So that is all definitely in there. And I think that one of the unique things about Allison, who's the woman who goes to investigate this, is she kind of straddles both of these. So she's living in this very wealthy house. She doesn't own it, but she's there in that section of the wealthy town. But she's also interacting with all of the locals who are the business people, who are the people who aren't as wealthy. And so she kind of is moving between those. And I think that's one of the ways that she can actually get into this story and figure out what happened to this girl. So yes, it's it was really interesting. I don't know that when I first started writing it, I had thought about the class thing as much. For me, it was more about women and friendship and what stories get told and whose voices get erased. I really love the Joyce Carol Oates novel Black Water, where she gives voice to the woman who drowned at Chappaquiddick. And so I've always kind of been influenced by that, that idea of retelling someone's story. And so in a lot of suspense novels, there's always a dead girl, and the dead girl doesn't always get a voice, right? She's the catalyst for the crime. This person shows up and she's dead, and now people are trying to figure out what happened to her. And so I guess one of the things I wanted to do was tell the story of the dead girl. And so I gave her a voice. So my novel actually alternates points of view and time period. So there's a 1985 thread, and then there's present day thread, because I really wanted to weave that story in.
Every time I would get back to the 1985 perspective, I would think of the tagline for the Adam Sandler movie, The Wedding Singer. Don't pretend you don't remember. I'm I was there.
There's really fun research involved in that timeline.
Exactly. Next time, would you please write about the south of France so I can go and be your amanuensis? So that is my way of getting to you, Chris, because what I really love about Thomas and Beal, again, yes, they are of different races. And yes, this has been a big hurdle for them. But when they come to Paris, that changes because of the way France deals with racial difference, which isn't necessarily in an angelic way, but it's definitely different. And so I was wondering if you might talk about that tension, because you have this fabulous character named Diallo Touré, who's from Senegal, and he wants to instruct Beal. He wants to tell her past, and there's a lot that goes on with it. No spoilers here, but I thought that was a very different kind of tension. It's not white and black. It's between African American and African.
Well, it's certainly territory that it takes a fiction writer who's sort of willing to be, how should I say, somewhat heedless to go there. But that's where the story took me. That's where, as I say, place and history demanded a kind of an understanding of what did she know about Africa, and she knows nothing. So obviously, France was a very, very different place. The French pride themselves that they aren't a race; they are a language and a culture. And if you speak the language and you adopt a culture, you're French. Well, that's not working out so well these days. And as another character, another minor character who I love, a Jewish painter, finds out, he's saying, don't think Beal has it so tough. Try being a Jew in France in 1895, in the middle of the Dreyfus affair, as some of the people may know, that case. That
he says at one point that whenever he goes into a restaurant or a cafe, he feels like he's hearing blah 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 juif, blah 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 juif, and that's a very telling moment about Arthur himself personally, but also about what it must have been like in those days in France.
Yeah, so I wanted to do that. I mean, Francophile that I am, I didn't want to let them off the hook, because they shouldn't be left off the hook. But really, I think my story, sort of, as I say, race creates the situation, and we all know that racism dehumanizes. It tries to take away our very most private souls, and so this was a chance to give this marriage a chance to allow them to live in a way that wasn't possible in America. Historically, it wasn't just totally easy, but it was unthinkable in America and very doable in France. And so it's about a marriage. It's not a fairy tale. I mean,
right.
People have wondered. They say, gee, they escaped to France and then they're having all this trouble. And it's saying, well, of course they're having trouble. Think of who they were. They hardly knew each other, at least as humans.
They're very young. They're very young.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, young, and young it is the word. And I sort of think about, the more I wrote it, the more I realized I was really writing about a marriage. That was never my intention, really. It wasn't not my intention, but to write the story of a marriage was what came out. And so thinking about young people getting together, their secrets and lies that they sort of have to tell each other, and the difference between loyalty and faithfulness, what that means. And in the end, I think about, not to throw anything too huge, but that wonderful sort of often quoted phrase from the poet Mandelstam, talking about her husband who was killed in the Gulag in 1938, and to say, what wouldn't we have given for such ordinary heartbreak? And so that's really what I'm trying to give Thomas and Beal, not white man, black woman. I'm just trying to give them ordinary heartbreak.
Ordinary heartbreak. I love that. Very, very beautiful. Angie, the heartbreak for your family in Miracle Creek, for your protagonist's family, is one that is fraught with layers of hardship in being immigrants. And when I was looking at the new paperback edition, of course, it includes an interview that you did with your wonderful publisher / editor, Sarah Crichton.
Mhm.
And it reminded me of the fact that at 11, you came to the United States from Korea with your parents, and you came to a completely new lifestyle in your aunt and uncle's house in Maryland. But, you know, your father and mother were working in a convenience store, a grocery, behind bulletproof glass. And your father was once shot. Fortunately, you know, it was not a fatal,
right.
wound, but you know, there was a lot going on, and a lot goes on for Young and her family in Miracle Creek. Also, it's again, I think it's layered, and the tensions. When I talk about parental conflict, I'm not just talking about a push me pull you over, you know, how to discipline children. I'm talking about, you know, a parental conflict between how to live in a new place. And so, you know, Chris has been talking about giving characters a new place to live so they could have ordinary heartbreak. Your characters have this new place to deal with that is really, really difficult. And, you know, they're working so hard all the time that they're not always able to spend the time they would like to understand, you know, things that are ordinary. Is that fair?
No, I think that's very fair, and I think, but of course, the ordinary conflicts do come into,
exactly.
You know, they of course are what life is made up of, and some of the, I think, I don't want to say fun, but some of the tension comes from the fact that these parents are sort of comparing, you know, their children to each other's children. And which I think is a tendency that, you know, we parents, at least I, in my, you know,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I think not to do, but and also, and then juxtaposed with that parental sacrifice in sort of moving their entire lives, giving up their language, giving up, which I think is a huge part of your identity. You know, when you come to a place where you are no longer fluent, it just changes your personality. It changes the way that you act and feel, and, you know, so I think that's really substantial and so fundamental. And so there's that. And it also changes your relationship to your child, because when the children pick up the language more quickly, and, you know, then they become sort of the more competent ones. They become the ones that you have to call to sort of, you know, be the ones who talk to the doctor for you, and, you know, and talk to the government administration, and talk to the DMV, and all of those things that normally the parents do for their children. All of a sudden, the children become the sort of grown-ups and the experts. And so that change is also a fundamental one as well. And then you juxtapose that against the kind of, you know, child-centered parental sacrifice that you make when your children have medical issues or disabilities. And then the sort of the hierarchies that are inherent in those worlds, where the parents sort of talk about and think about, you know, how disabled is my child versus yours, and, like, you know, and what does that mean as far as our social standing, and as far as the relative happiness of my life versus yours. So all of those things, I think, come into play. And to me, it was fascinating to sort of be able to put this into this physical sort of crucible of sorts, this chamber, this sealed medical chamber, you know, where all these people are sort of sealed in, and they have no choice but to sort of deal with each other.
And I just, this is a little tangent, but I also remember from the Q&A in the paperback edition that wasn't it your son himself who identified it as looking like a submarine?
Yes. So so I did this hyperbaric oxygen therapy thing, an experimental thing for my 4-year-old who was suffering from ulcerative colitis as sort of a last measure of desperation.
Yeah.
And he was 4 and he pointed to it and he was like, look, it's a submarine. Because we had just watched the Beatles' Yellow Submarine for family viewing. And it looked just like that, except that it was blue.
It was blue.
And so it was our blue submarine, and it had 4 portals because there were 4 patients who were allowed inside, just like the 4 Beatles, so it was really perfect. And in fact, I have a video of my kids. The 4-year-old is now in college. I can't believe. So now so I have a video of him when he was 4 and his brother when he was 2, that whole summer going around singing, we all live in a yellow summer, except that they were singing it as blue submarine. And then sometimes they would say purple or fuchsia or being crazy.
I love that because you almost called it Miracle Submarine.
We tried to call it Miracle Submarine. There were some booksellers involved who had very strong objections, and we had thousands of arcs out there that had to be covered up with stickers.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
How we thought it was going to be called Miracle Submarine. Here's a new sticker. Here, please put it over the title of the arc. It says Miracle Creek now.
Oh my goodness. The things that happen in our industry. I mean, it's just, we've all been there. Yeah. Now, Chris, you talked a few minutes ago about place, and I know we talked about Opal Beach a bit with you as well. We're here with the Library of Virginia Awards. Now, only Angie's book actually takes place in Virginia, so she wins, right?
Yeah.
But place is important in all of the novels. And so I wanted to hear you each talk about that. But just before we go into the question, I want to send out another reminder to anyone watching that you can send us questions for the authors, not for me, by putting them into Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're viewing this. So please, we will get to questions at a point very soon. But let's talk about place. Let's talk about what that means to you, not just for these individual books, but what it means to you as a storyteller overall. Tara?
I think Christopher said something about how he starts with place and then figures out how the characters would kind of react in that space, which I think is really interesting. Place is super important to me as well, because I feel like I need to know where these people are, right, in order to see how they're interacting and what they're doing. Otherwise, they just feel like they're in this like black vacuum speaking. And so I really, that's super important to me. And I like atmosphere, right? So I like creepy things. And so I always surprise. And so to me, like the atmosphere and the feeling of a place and what it looks like I really like to get very into that. And that, in some ways, in a lot of ways, in my book, I feel like the beach became its own character. Mm-hmm. And I was able to explore that character from this sort of off-season feel where, all the tourists are gone and, only the sort of year-round people remain. And what does that feel like? And what does that mean? But also the height of the summer season and what that also does to the town and how it changes it. And also how this place changes over time and what stays the same. And so I really enjoyed that because I felt like I really got to know what this beach town would feel like and what people would do differently during different times and things like that. So yes, it's very important to me, I think.
Excellent. Yeah. Chris, how about you? I know we talked a bit about France, and one of the things about Thomas and Beal and the Midi is it's not just about a country or just about a region. It's about actual I'm not going to say this very well, terroir.
And you did very well.
Thank you. Merci, monsieur.
It is, yes, it is about soil types and whatever. And I'm afraid I will always go deeper into those weeds than I should. I just like, as I say, well, I maybe didn't say, but granular. But you know, more back to place. To more generally, it's so fundamental to me that I don't even know how to describe it. Sort of the role it plays. But what I do think of when I sort of try to talk about this with students, or I'm asked it, is I won't tell you the long sob story, but there I was in 1984, middle of the night. I've been at this for quite a while. I mean, I got out of the Navy in 1971 or two and doing a lot of other things, but I've been at this for a long time with no success. And I was sort of at a moment where I was really saying, you know, this is sink or swim. I just going to have to pick up another career somehow at age almost 40 or whatever I was then. And so I sat down and in kind of desperation, I just started writing. And what I wrote was a description of a piece of shorefront along the Chester River in Maryland. I grew up for the most part in Boston, but this family place was there. It's always been sort of the center of my life. And I just described being on this beach, and somehow I just knew that I was in a place as a writer and as sort of my own self-awareness that I'd never been before. So it's simply that, and I've never let that go. That's been what has gotten me through the worst of it ever since.
Love that. Angie, how about you? Especially because, you know, as you were saying, Miracle Creek is in sort of rural Virginia. And so it's a place that, you know, has its own feel. Definitely.
It definitely does. And I definitely have a place in mind for it where I drove around, you know, in sort of Western Loudoun County, the Plains, like that sort of area. So I lived for a year after after graduating from law school in Charlottesville and doing a clerkship. And my husband is from North Carolina. So I've sort of, and as someone who's Asian and an immigrant, I think those are the kinds of things that I certainly, I was going to say one thinks about, but I shouldn't presume to speak for other people. But for me, and especially with our children being biracial and things like that, when my husband and I talked about sort of where we were going to live, there was almost no question that it was going to be in Virginia, because it sort of, you know, was, you know, metropolitan enough in the sense of being diverse enough for me, but, you know, sort of still had that country feel that my North Carolinian rural, you know, kind of, you know, background husband was comfortable with. And so, and we really thought a lot about how a family that is interracial with our kids, and, you know, we're going to feel in Virginia. And and we went to lots of different places to visit, and we considered lots of different places. And it's really interesting how different the feel of a place and the racial makeup and things like that can be from sort of where I am right now in Fairfax County, versus even an hour from now, which is such an easy drive, you know, and it's gorgeous country. We love, you know, visiting wineries and things like that. But then how, especially about 20 years ago, I felt so a little more guarded as somebody who didn't look like anyone else that I saw in the towns where I was. So interesting. So I wanted to bring that sense to this place, because I think that's so it's so interesting to me that can help a family like an immigrant family, you know, that's at the center of my novel, feel the kind of disconnect and sort of the desperation and shame of, you know, being different. how much that sense of place can affect you, because I feel it myself personally,
I haven't heard you talk about this, at least at this length before. And that's really, really fascinating. I want to do a whole panel there. And I know also that I need to get to questions soon, but I do have a few more things to pester you all with tonight. And one of the things is, the honors tonight are being given by the Library of Virginia, and I think we all have so much love for our state's library. And, founded in 1823, it's been around for a long time. It does so much good. So do any of you have a personal story about a library? And it's totally fine if it's one from when you were 5 years old. And let's talk a little bit during this Banned Books Month why libraries matter so much to each of us. And it doesn't have to be about banned books per se, but I think it would be great if we talked about libraries and our love for them.
So okay, go there. Go. We're fighting each other. No, you go first.
I just have a funny thing. The first thing I thought of when you had sent that question, Bethanne, was that my favorite cat that I had was born on top of a library, like on the roof of a library. And I always thought that was hilarious because she was the dumbest cat ever. She was like the sweetest cat, but she was so stupid. And I was like, okay, you had all this knowledge surrounding you, and it did not seep in at all. But she's lovely. She was lovely. And it was very apropos that I had a cat that was born in a library. It was great.
Yeah, very apropos.
But the thing I had to say was about being a child, right? And being exposed to a library. Like, I still remember going to library in elementary school, and just the idea of looking around and being like, I could take whatever book I want. Really? That's so cool. And our son, Dashel, who's going to be 9 in December, but I remember when we took him to the library, he would just go around and pick all these books, and we'd have this huge stack, and he got his own library card before he could read, I think, and learned how to pull the stool over and check out everything himself, and he was very excited about it. But when he was really little, he used to get confused when we would go to bookstores, and he would treat them like they were libraries. And so he would walk around and he would pull books off, and he'd be like, here you go, mommy and daddy, these are what I want. And we're like, you actually have to buy those. So why don't you choose one?
So maybe don't you pick 20? Yeah.
You didn't understand the concept.
I know you had a story you wanted to share.
Oh, yes. Okay. So first of all, so I was just reminded, Tara, when you were saying that, I think the first time I met you was in a library at Reston Library. In Fairfax County. I think that's where I first met you. But in any case,
it was. Yeah.
So my story is that so I came, from Korea to the Baltimore area when I was 11. So I was in middle school. I didn't speak the language at all. So obviously I was bullied completely. And and the painful part of that is that when you start learning a language, your receptive language is increased, is better than your expressive. So I still wasn't able to speak, but I could understand pretty much what people were saying, and realized that kids were talking about me in front of me and what they were saying, because they thought that I couldn't speak the language because I couldn't speak it really very well, right? And so there were a lot of tears and, drama. It's middle school girls. So I remember, so my haven during this entire time was the Towson Library, my, Baltimore County Library. That's sort of where I went. And that's where I went to sort of hide out, because, it was sort of a safe place and there was no talking, so it was I was safe. I didn't have to talk. And also the librarians are so kind. So between using, finger gestures and whatever, I didn't really have to be ashamed of the fact that I had to do that in order to ask a question and get their help. all that kind of, and I remember I like took the bus into the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore to get some. I was a pianist, and to get some scores like for free, because we couldn't afford them.
Mhm.
And so all of these things, like just the library system in that area in Baltimore County and the city also, is just sort of like so special to me. And so I love libraries. Libraries are my favorite, and to this, like I just, yeah,
And
I just,
Enoch Pratt is a great shout out to them. They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful library.
Love
Chris, how about you? I mean, certainly I have, since I went to grad school at UVA, my memories are of Alderman, my library, and I actually, believe it or not, have some fond ones. But you might have a different library story, not a University of Virginia story.
Yeah. Well, of course, Alderman is being gutted as we speak, and it may be very beautiful, but my colleagues in the English department have been fighting over number of volumes it's going to have, down to the last page for a year and a half. But anyway, no, I think Tara and Angie's stories are just so beautiful, and I'm not going to try and match either one of them. I just would be sort of vaguely political and say what I care about libraries is the word public in it. And I look at 40 years of, now don't get me started, but 40 years of starving any institution or activity with the word public in it: public education, public works, public libraries, public access to communication. It's sort of time that the word public, we kind of realize what it means. And so there are libraries. I mean, this is a tradition. They may be, in some ways, the first institutions in America that were public in this way.
Yeah.
I'd have to research that. Others would know the answer to that, but still. So I love the Library of Virginia. I've already called it a dear friend or something like that, and I mean it. But I like it because it's public.
Yeah.
Excellent answer. Excellent.
Yeah.
And well, because we've been talking for an hour, I am going to go. We have a few questions, and believe me, if we get through these questions, I have more questions. Yep. So we're not letting you go until the final moment. So the first one is from Joseph Papa, and he wants to say, thank you all so much for being here. This has been a lovely evening. Has it been a challenge for any of you to write during the pandemic? Very big question. See, Joseph, I was trying to keep it light. No, I'm kidding. It is a challenge. And I know many of our colleagues, some people are finding it almost impossible to write. There are a few who are writing more than ever, but how about for the three of you?
So I have had horrible time writing and reading and all sorts of things. I had, just family members, a dear uncle that I lived with because when my parents were, running the grocery store, he passed away early on during the pandemic. And then, so it's been really difficult. I've been really trying to, I've done something recently that is a sort of a good tip for those of you out there that I really like. So I've formed a silent Zoom group with some other writers. So we get on, we talk for, we should talk for like 5 minutes, but we end up talking for a lot longer. But still, especially on the days when something, is really happening on the political front, which is like every day. But in any case, but we try to, and then we mute ourselves on Zoom and we just write for, like 3 hours. And then we'll say, we'll do this at 10 and then we'll usually go until 1. And then we'll say, okay, we'll break for like 10 minutes at 1 and chat and sort of see how things are going and if people have questions. So there's, like about, 6, 7 of us, and sometimes only 2 people show up and whatever, but we've been doing it and it's been nice because then I sort of feel like, okay, I have to get my, I have to just sort of like put everything away, whatever it is. And I've been really good about like just not doing social media. I've put screen, limits on my phone so that I give myself, I believe, 2 minutes of social media per day.
Wow.
And I've actually lost the passcode. So at this point, even if I wanted to, I couldn't like unlock my phone, like for those certain apps, more than like the limit that I gave myself. It's written down somewhere, but I forgot where.
It sounds like you found a way to keep writerly community going.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing.
Yeah.
How about you, Chris? Are you writing as much as ever? I know you sometimes you and Caroline are in Maryland and doing a lot of work there, very intense.
Yeah, we have been. I mean, we have nothing but luck on our side. Luck and privilege. It can only be said. Our children, our three sons. That seems to be the theme. One of the themes of our evening. Sons. Anyway, are sort of grown, two living in Baltimore and one in Brooklyn, naturally, and they're doing fine. They're in situations that have not been too rough on them, and so we're holed up. My wife Caroline is also a novelist, and we're holding up. I've found, I don't know whether it's just this book or whether it's my age or something, but I've found that I'm working slower and sort of more of a miniaturist, really. I'm getting far fewer pages done a day, maybe one. Never been like that. I've always sort of, just ground it out and then, of course, chuck the bad stuff. But it seems that this pulling in of sort of attention and regard into just this little farmhouse has affected this kind of aspect of my writing practice. So it's been nice.
Interesting. And Tara, how about you with a very active, energetic 9-year-old to be schooled and cared for?
Yeah, it's definitely harder for us. I have been working full time from home since March at my day job.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband Art, who's also a writer, but he's a professor at George Mason, so he's been teaching online from home, and our son's full-time virtual. So during the week, we are all fortunate that we have our own sort of spaces to go to. Mm-hmm. Like I have an office, Art has an office, and Dash's bedroom has a desk and everything. But it's very weird to be all on the same floor, and I can hear, PE and music going on in the next room, and he'll come in and be like, "Look at this math problem," and I'm like, "I'm in the middle of editing something." But that said, so this is the first time I'm on deadline for a novel. I've always just sort of been writing and messing around and doing things, but now I've got like a contract and I've got a deadline for this next book, and so I have to write. And in some ways, it's been a nice distraction or a nice focus. Like, okay, the world is going to shit, but I have a fiction book that I'm writing, so I need to focus on this, which has helped in some ways and also been very difficult because it's very hard to be creative when there's so much going on and, it's depressing. So like Angie, I've limited my news intake as much as I can. Like I try not to, because it just feels like this weight that gets put upon you whenever, I look at the news or I look through social media and people are posting things. So I'm trying to limit that. It's hard to limit that, especially when you're sort of used to doing that. But so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a blessing and a curse. And I also feel very privileged in many ways because we both can work from home, and our son's old enough where he can be a bit independent. I have friends who have toddlers and are trying to work full time, or, there's many, many other situations that are a lot worse. But yes, it's been very, very hard.
Well, thank you for being so candid, all of you, about this, because it is something that is, it's affecting everything. It's affecting your personal and professional lives, and also, ultimately what we read in the next 5 to 10 years, is being affected. And that's a whole other ball of wax. So another question from Anna Moser. I'd love to know if you discipline yourself to write at certain times for a certain length of time, or if you write as the spirit moves you. And thank you for your kind words, Anna, about my moderating.
Yeah.
We just talked about that to a certain extent, but I think let's leave these strange and uncertain times for a moment and just talk about your usual, if we can, writing routine. I think most of the successful writers I know, the writers who are being nominated for awards and publishing, etc., probably don't wait for the spirit to move them, because if you do that all the time, you don't get any pages done. But I could be wrong. So tell me, Chris, how about you? I mean, you were just talking about how normally you're someone who, writes quite a few pages per day. Did you start, for example, with a certain word count? I'm going to write 2,000 words every day, or certain page count, or was it time?
Yeah, I've never really done that. But my sort of practice in the last 20 years, I've just been sort of teaching full time at UVA since
Right.
2000, and I've never been able to keep my own work going too deep into the term.
Mm-hmm.
I know Tara's husband, his experience is, but long about October, I'm just not pretending that I'm working on my own work anymore. So it had become a little bit more of a very intense month around the holidays, and very intense 3 or 4 months, 7 days a week, as much as I could do, as much as I could force myself to do. And so that's really the way I wrote the last 3 books, is on these sort of somewhat wild spurts. And I don't necessarily recommend that. I don't think that's the right way to get it done, but it's just the only way I could do it. And so now I'm sort of limping toward retirement, and the pandemic, as we've discussed, has changed things anyway. And so I'm trying out this sort of new style, which is very much 7 days a week. I mean, but I don't try to do 6 hours. If I do 3.5, 4 hours of good work, I've knocked it out of the park, as far as I'm concerned.
Gotcha. And Angie, you were talking about your writers group, of course, your Zoom writers group.
Yeah.
And I one thing, you were talking about writing for 3 hours. My question, which is sort of to bring the question around to without having you have to repeat anything, is, do you write another 3 hours later in the day, or are those 3 hours your generative hours, if you will, and then maybe you revise later on, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm very inefficient, sadly, and I'm very much of a procrastinator, and I'm also very inertial.
Don't tell them.
Like one of these people that I go to bed really late, because when I'm up, like, it seems so fun to be up, and then when I'm like sleeping, it seems so great to be sleeping. So so I'm very inertial, and I very much depend on momentum, and I have a really hard time starting a new scene. And it might take me like 2 weeks to figure out like the first paragraph, but then once I sort of get going, then I get momentum. So generally I might be in that same place, like in front of my computer, which I've now like decided is very unhealthy for me. And so I've now like made a little treadmill desk that's do it yourself with a piece of wood. But anyway, so hopefully it doesn't fall on my foot or something. But if you ever hear that I broke my foot, you'll know what happened.
I will know why.
But so I might be in front of the computer for the same number of hours a day, but the actual hours, the number of like, hours or even minutes that I'm actually being productive might be very different from day to day. Like it might be only an hour one day, and it might be like 8 hours the next day. And sometimes, like, if I'm really into something and I really want to finish something, I might be like, okay, I'm just going to pull an all-nighter and just get it done because I'm so excited. But So it just really, really depends. But I do try to sit there in front of the computer for at least several hours a day.
And that, that is all right now we can really ask. But how about you, Tara, with a day job? Do you do all of your writing in the evening or after Dash goes to bed, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, the one thing I find really interesting just about hearing all of our different stories is just how different everybody is, right? So I feel like the one thing people could take away from this is you could be a writer and just do it any way that fits your lifestyle. For me, I'm like super efficient at this point. I have to be.
I'm so jealous.
So I could literally sit down for 10 minutes and like pump out a scene, and like I just do it, and I'm like, okay, it's not going to be pretty right now, but it's going to be there, and then I can work with it. And the way that I got through the draft of the second novel, which then I ended up throwing out and rewriting, but that's a different story. The way I got through the first draft of it is I lied to myself, and I said, okay, you're going to do 15 minutes at least 4 times a week. And I was like, 15 minutes is totally doable, right? Anybody can find 15 minutes in their day. Knowing that once I sat down and kind of got into it, it would probably take me a little bit longer. So like there would be days where that 15 minutes would turn into a half hour or 45 minutes or my entire lunch hour, because I write when I was going into the office, I would write during my lunch hour. And that was cool. And then there were some days where it was really painful and the 15 minutes was like 15 minutes, but at least I had it down. And so I got 70,000 words done, 6 months or whatever doing that. In addition to my full-time job. So the places, the times that I most often find to write are on my lunch hour and while I'm putting my son to bed, because he still likes people to kind of be around him while he's going to bed. And so I found if I bring my laptop in and it's nice and quiet and dark and he's quiet and we're going to sleep, that it's a good time for me to focus and write. So those are the 2 times that I really can
I love that. I love Dak even more now. He's such a great kid. Sons, all these wonderful sons. And Chris, I just have to mention, has the most adorable grandson in the world.
Oh,
really,
Chris, I love that you have 3 sons, because I have 3 sons also.
Yes, and I'm from a family of 4 brothers and no sisters, and
oh wow,
and our son and daughter-in-law who have 1 son, they have a second child due on December 25th, a boy.
Wonderful. A boy on December 25th. No expectations for that one.
Yeah. We pretty much do boys. Caroline, would have loved something a little different, but hey.
See, next time we should just have our sons on. Let them do interviews for us.
Now, we do have one more question I will get to before we have to end. And I had so many more that I wanted to ask, but, we only get a certain amount of time. So Jeff Barnes would like to ask Angie and Tara, as first-time novelists, can you briefly comment on your experience finding an agent? And I think for both of you, that was really something quite different. So it should be interesting to hear.
Sure. You want to go first, Angie?
Yeah, no, you go first.
Okay.
I want to hear yours.
So the 2 short stories that I published before this novel, I did not have an agent for. So I went to small press publishers with that. And when I had thought about transitioning to writing a novel, because I'm very much a short fiction person. Like I've edited a flash fiction magazine for many years, which is like really, really, really short stories, like 1 to 2 pages. And I've just always really loved the short form. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to transition to this novel thing, I'm going to try to go the traditional route and, get an agent and see what happens. And by the time that I had started this process, I had already been, pretty much in a community of writers. I knew a lot of writers. I'd been to a lot of writer mystery conventions and the Association for Writers Writing Programs. And so I knew a lot of people through my editing literary magazine gig, and also, just through writing and stuff. And so I started my agent search with, asking friends who had agents if they would be willing to kind of do that intro, because to me, the whole cold calling, pitching agents thing was like scary. And I wanted to, I knew writers, and I knew the writers who I admired. And so I thought, well, that would be the best way to go. So that's what I did. I contacted, I don't even know how many, like 5 to 10 writer friends of mine who had agents that I knew they, had good relationships with. And I asked them to kind of do an email intro. And that's how I found my agent. So, one of those. So
agent. I just would like to give a shout out to what did you say in your acknowledgments? The incredibly intelligent and exceptionally attractive Michelle Richter.
Oh, Michelle is so great. I love her.
She's so awesome.
She is. You have a great agent of your own, Angie. So let's hear your story.
I love my agent so much. She's like, okay, so my story is, because I'm totally, again, I didn't have any novelist friends. I'm in a writing group, but my writing group was not, like, I was the first one to finish a novel and all that kind of stuff. But I had, published in literary magazines and things, and so I had sort of like known, I had come to sort of be familiar with editors, who edit lit mags and things like that. So I sort of asked them, who are sort of the hot agents right now? Like, who are sort of the great, like, if you could have anybody in the world? Because I just figured, what, I'm new. Who knows what's going to happen with this novel? Might as well sort of like go for the dream and then go from there. And so I sort of compiled this list from Googling and asking those people for, like, 10 agents that, like, I would just like love to have as my agent, that type of thing. Because I was like, I don't know anybody. I'm new to this. I might as well just go for it. And so I sent them all a cold, the total cold pitch using their submission guidelines. And one of them said that they wanted the full manuscript, and then a couple of weeks later gave me an offer. And so then I immediately, this is the sort of, so I'm a lawyer, and I was also a McKinsey management consultant. So based on all that, I was like, ooh, let's strategize. So then I like immediately sent out an email to the other 9 agents that I had, cold written, the cold queried or whatever, saying, like, in all caps, I'm very into all caps, offer of representation. And I was like, are you interested? And that type of thing. I didn't even say who I got the offer of representation to. So it occurred to me later, I could have completely been lying about this and they wouldn't have known. But anyway, so
they would have known, actually. I've heard about this.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes, I have. Oh, believe me.
All right.
And I'm sure Chris could comment on that as well. But
yeah, no, I'm not saying that I should have lied or that none of you should lie. No. But and then it was great. Like, it's something like, I think it's the sort of, the fear of missing out, the FOMO in this world is very high. So then I think like 8 out of the 9 other agents immediately sent out an email back that day saying, go ahead, like, send me your full manuscript. So I was very lucky in that in my top 10, that I happened to send out from Googling and whatever, that I had this one person who happened to give me this offer. And then that enabled, like, me to sort of parlay that into sort of other people actually reading my work and taking it seriously. So then I was able to sort of, like, I went up to New York. It actually was on election day, if you can believe that, on 2016.
Oh my goodness.
Election day, I was in New York in my little red pantsuit, having like lunches and drinks with agents, going around, like, all being happy about what was going to happen and how I was going to go back home to this election party.
Pantsuit Nation, but unfortunately, well, we've got time to correct this, everyone. We've got time. Sorry, shouldn't be giving political statements.
No, you're right.
But unfortunately, we are out of time, and so I want to say thank you to all three of you: Angie Kim, Miracle Creek; Tara Laskowski, One Night Gone; Christopher Tilghman, Thomas and Beal in the Midi. All finalists for the Library of Virginia Fiction Award 2020. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn things back to Scott for a few final words.
Thank you, everyone. This was really a fascinating talk tonight. Bethanne, you did a fantastic job moderating. We really appreciate it. I would just like to remind everyone, if they would like to contribute towards our challenge, please visit the link in your chat or go to 804-692-3599. I know it's been flashed up on the screen tonight already, but we'd love for you to join us at 6 p.m. tomorrow for our poetry panel discussion, led by Virginia's Poet Laureate, Luisa Agloria, and this year's finalists, Lauren Aileen, David Huddle, and Benjamin Nakahasby Kingsley. And of course, join us for our nonfiction panel, the COTS Award on Friday, and our Literary Awards celebration at 6 p.m. on Saturday the 17th. Thank you so much for participating, and thank you guys so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.